We're going to go ahead and proceed with the afternoon workshop sessions. So if you wouldn't mind finding a seat. There is a little bit more room up front. If you're in the back and you want to move up front, that's available. And if you want to get your book signed, the line is down low. So now's the chance to go over and have Jeff Speck sign a book. And we're going to begin the workshop session here in just 1 minute. So if you could find a seat, grab some food if you haven't had lunch yet, or get a drink. And we're going to start here shortly.
Hey guys, this is Jeff. I actually told the 14 people in line that I would sign their books after this session because I didn't want to slow things down. So the book signing will pause until this session is over.
Thank you. What's that?
There's a staple, which is why you're going to keep it in your hand. Mine's not staple.
Do you want to borrow mine? Because I can just pass it over after we're done.
Oh, yeah. That's good.
Mr. Ted Knowlton, please report to the front desk.
Oh, he's way over there.
I saw him. There's TV. If you wouldn't mind taking a seat, and we're ready to begin the afternoon session. That's good speed walking, Ted. They turn them on.
Testing.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Jake Young with Salt Lake County Regional Development. I would also like to introduce our other two speakers as part of the afternoon session, which is Centers and Streets for People. And we'll be diving in a little bit into the weeds, talking about how to make our centers and streets more walkable. And then following, we have a good workshop with UTA on transit and walkability.
So I'm Julie Bjornstead, a transportation planner at the Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Good afternoon. I'm Ted Knowlton, Deputy Director at Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Thank you. Thank you, Ted and Julie. You guys can stay up here. Okay, so we would like to talk about centers and streets for people. And as part of the Wasatch Choice 2050 vision, it includes centers. And Ted is going to talk for just a second about what is the Wasatch Choice 2050 and the goals.
Yeah, thanks, Jake, and I'll be brief on this, but Wasatch Choice 2050 is our shared blueprint for the coming decades. It's the story of local government's vision for their community and how that dovetails with a regional vision for roads, transit, active transportation, and regional open space. With regard to this conversation, it's important to note that it is built on a foundation of walkable centers, metropolitan centers, urban centers, city centers, and neighborhood centers. And what does that mean? Those are places where communities have said, we want to go to bat for walkability, and we want to do it in these kinds of places. Jake will bring up a map, and he'll show you some of the centers just in Salt Lake County. But this Wasatch Choice is the story of Brigham City all the way down to Santa Quinn, all the way down through Utah County, including Morgan County, Tooele County, Summit, and Wasatch County. So it's a big area. And here's the beautiful thing about Wasatch Choice 2050. It's local governments, UDOT, UTA, all saying, let's go and get to work and make this happen. We will each do our part to incrementally achieve great places. And so we can change the suburbs if that is desired. If the vision is desired by each individual community, we can make it happen working together incrementally. Back to you, Jake.
Thank you. Thank you, Ted. Okay. Let's hear it for Wasatch Choice. Wasatch Choice is a 4-year planning process, and it was adopted earlier this year, and it is available at the WFRC website. And it also includes MAG, which is Utah County and Summit, and Wasatch as well. WFRC was busy in mapping how walkable is a community. You can't look at all of the factors that Jeff talked about, but there are 4 main factors that WFRC used in mapping walkability, and these maps will be made online in the future. So the map on the upper left is households per acre. The map on the right is jobs per acre. And then the map on the lower left, these are the small maps. The map in the lower left is street connectivity, which Jeff talked about earlier and the importance of that. And then also the smaller map on the lower right, household and employment balance.
Jake, let me testing, test.
Here.
All right, I like to do that. I wanted to mention that, so a lot of you have this map on your table. We also have versions of this for Weber, Davis, and Utah counties. And so later on, we'll ask you to do a raise of hands if you want one of those maps, and we'll bring it out to you. I would say that the story of this in a nutshell is it refers to what Jeff Speck referred to as the useful walk. This is a story of where are the useful walks today. Thanks.
Thank you. So here's Salt Lake County. You'll notice downtown, Sugar House, Daybreak, Sandy, Murray. There's a lot of good areas that are the darker blue. Those are the areas that are more walkable and have the potential to become more walkable centers. This next map is Davis County. You'll notice the Great Salt Lake on the left, and then you'll see Bountiful, downtown, Kaysville, and then going up towards Ogden. Good opportunity in our centers to be more walkable, and again, it's households, it's street connectivity, it's jobs, and mixing it all together. This next map is Weber County. You'll notice downtown Ogden being in the darker blue. Brigham City also has good walkability on its main street in downtown and potential there. The darker areas are more walkable. And then our last map on this topic is Utah County. You'll notice American Fork, Pleasant Grove, Orem, Provo, Springville. A lot of really good opportunities for walkability in our historic areas and our downtown. So earlier, Jeff talked about mixing land uses, and that's a really important part of creating a walkable center. And I wanted you to think about every city can actually have a 24-hour city. And then you'll see, and a lot of times when you talk about 24-hour cities, people start thinking of Las Vegas and all that, and that's not what I'm saying. When you think about uses, live, work, play, well, sleeping is a great use. And so having residents in your downtown and your cities is something that's very important. So we really need to start to convert our cities into more 24-hour centers with more housing that's happening. So in Philip Walker's book, he cites a study talking about how residents typically spend 3 to 4 more times dollars and money downtown than employees. When you have residents living in downtowns and centers, they're going to spend those dollars and reinforce your downtown. So rule number 17 in Jeff's book, make downtown parking a public utility. And I want you to think for a second, what is a public utility? What does it provide? It provides services for the mass goods, water, sewer, electricity, gas. There's a lot of good utilities that we receive. Have any of you here ever had a house that had a well instead of being plugged in? I see a few hands. Have any of you ever had a house that had a septic tank instead of sewer? Well, I actually did once upon a time, and I don't anymore, and I'm so grateful that I don't have a septic tank. When you think about the benefits and opportunities of individual services, it just doesn't work. It doesn't help the masses. There's not an economy scale, and so we need public utilities. And that's where, when we look at parking, looking at resources together, having parking garages, having cities bring resources together for parking, and doing the utility approach and managing it that way, you can stretch those parking stalls farther, having shared parking and management. So that's something that cities really can be working on, is looking at parking as a public utility. And in Jeff's book, he goes more into that, and that's rule number 17. So two of the other parking-related rules are number 18, decouple and share parking, and then rule number 16, eliminate on-site parking requirements. Parking is a significant cost of development. And recently I reached out to a local developer and I asked them, what is the cost of parking of your projects? And they really helped out. They went and they penciled it out and they looked at, okay, what is parking costing us? And these are recent built projects in Utah. You'll notice for the office, it's 23%. For the two St. George projects, multifamily and hotel, it's 10 and 5%. Those two projects happen together with a single garage, and that's why the cost is a little bit lower. The multifamily there at 7%, and then these two Salt Lake City projects at the bottom, 12% and 14%. Parking is a tremendous cost of development these days, and if we want to bring the cost of housing down, we need to bring the cost of parking down as well. And these numbers do not include the land that is dedicated for parking, so that also bumps up the cost. Rule number 9, fix your codes. It's a good opportunity for cities to go back and look at their ordinances, create form-based codes, and really work on the ordinance, because that is what is driving development, that is what is guiding development, is the codes. I think the Art Space project in Salt Lake is a really good example of mixing land uses. It has, I'm going to pull up my numbers here so I can share a little bit. So the Art Space project on 800 South and 400 West has about 132 residential units and 54,000 square feet of commercial and 61 commercial tenants on 3.8 acres. And there's no parking garages. And last year I talked with the management company, and their occupancy is above 90%, almost 100%. And I've been by there a number of times during the day, and it's nearly full, but there's always just a few spots available. Just a really good example of having both residential and office together. This one I think is a fun example to be watching, also relating to eliminating parking requirements. Now, these Utah cities have not eliminated parking requirements, but they're bringing them down, they're changing it, they're looking at ways to reinvent it. Last year, West Jordan adopted their residential overlay zone, which has a minimum of 45 units per acre up to a maximum of 75 units per acre. And this is applicable at the Jordan Landing project. And of course, if you've been by there, you know that Jordan Landing has a lot of parking, a lot of asphalt, and there's tremendous opportunity there to reinvent it and to add housing. And this is something that they recently did and are working on to add housing. Two different projects here, and as we work on cities and do planning and look at our area, we need to think about what kind of environment do we want. The Holiday Town Center is a good example of a walkable village. How many of you been to the Holiday Village within the few years? I see a lot of hands. Managing parking was essential in creating the Holiday Village. They reduced parking requirements. They have the opportunity for shared parking. And also you can have parking that is off-site, that is walkable. That was a big part of the planning for Holiday in terms of making the village. Provo reduced parking in beginning of 2009, 2010, and as part of that, they were able to build 1,400 units in their downtown and their TOD areas. And I reached out to a past planner of Provo, and he said they reduced parking requirements by 50% in order to get more housing happening in downtown and also near their TOD. And he attributed 700 of those 1,400 units to reducing parking to make that happen. And now Julie's going to talk about street design.
Sorry, I never do well when I have to hold the microphone and the clicker. All right. You don't have so Jake just talked about parking and land use. Oh, sorry. And so today I'm going to talk about street design and street connectivity, which are really the foundations of making good walkable centers. When we think about the communities that we love, that are full of life, that we go visit, these are all based on that good street connectivity. And the reason why it's such an important foundation to our walkable urban centers is that we can change land uses, we can convert building use, we can change our parking structures. But one thing that's really hard to change once we're a mature area is that street network. And if you can imagine trying to go back into, obviously this is Rome, and changing that street network, it would be an utter disaster. So on the surface, what we're talking about is multiple routes and multiple connections to get from one location to another. But what we really mean and what we really experience is being able to get to more destinations in either the same amount of time or a shorter amount of time. And this can affect our access to opportunities. It can affect our participation in the job market. And so this is an example of a typical area in Utah. There's some mixture of land uses and some mixture of housing. But if we lived here and wanted to visit our friend's house, or lived here and wanted to go to our parents' house, or our child wanted to go from their house to school, although spatially we're very close and we have the infrastructure, there's sidewalks on every one of these streets, no one would actually do that by walking if they were in any sort of rush with their life. So we know that connected streets lead to more more walking. They also lead to more parking, as Jeff showed earlier. You can line them with on-street parking. So it's a win-win. And this has been studied. This is a study that was done about 8 years ago, comparing the the percentage of students who are walking in Daybreak, a walkable urban center, compared to the surrounding neighborhoods that are less walkable. And that the percentage of students walking to school drops from almost 90% to less than a fifth. So it has huge impacts on our health as well. So this is a study that was done in Wasatch, California, where they were comparing doing what now is more of a traditional suburban development pattern, the large arterial, some connectors, but mostly a disconnected network, compared to a more connected network. And what they found in comparing those two alternatives was a change in mode shift between vehicles to people now walking and biking, shorter distances that allowed people to walk and bike, and then streets that were more comfortable and more safe for people to do that active transportation. Connectivity also has a great impact on the economy. So not only are areas that are walkable and connected and compact have greater land value, but also when we compare them to our typical suburban developments, they hold their value longer over time. So how do you set the foundation to the foundation? So the most important thing is to have street connectivity ordinances. This is an example from Lehigh, so I encourage any city that doesn't have ordinances already to reach out to Lehigh and see what their experience was. But this set block sizes, set cul-de-sac lengths, and also required people to stub their streets so that when new developments came in, they would be connected. But what do you do if you already developed your community without street connectivity ordinances and got yourself into this situation? The situation, I don't have a pointer, is that you have two areas that don't connect. When there's opportunity to go in and connect streets, so here, like this is an example from Lehigh, go ahead and build those in before development comes in and kind of prohibits your ability to do that. When you're doing large areas of redevelopment, this was in Sugar House about, I want to say 6 or 7 years ago. There was a lot of redevelopment that was happening, and the city had the foresight to do a circulation plan. And we identified areas where those blocks could be broken up, not only with new streets, but also with pedestrian connections. And so as Sugar House has been developing, and this is a little bit of an older picture, and it's kind of hard to see, but you can see that they've already started putting in that connected grid that the city laid out. And so this picture, if you squint, you can see all of the cul-de-sacs that we have throughout our communities. And cul-de-sacs aren't necessarily a bad thing, but often when we go in to try to retrofit them or create connectivity, what we hear is it's unsafe for children, we don't like living on a street that has more traffic. But when we asked in the Utah Street Connectivity Guide that was done about 3 years ago how people felt about opening up their cul-de-sacs, in general they didn't really want more traffic connections, but almost 3/4 of the people that took our survey said they were okay with opening those cul-de-sacs for bicycles and pedestrians. And those connections don't have to be very impactful to our current developments, so they can be pretty non-invasive, and sometimes are the only way we can get over existing barriers such as creeks, railroad tracks, what have you. So now you have a connected city, and how do we get people to actually walk and bike on that city? And there's two main things. One is slowing our streets down, which Jeff talked about earlier, but also adding places for people to use that network, so bicycle lanes, wide sidewalks. The most important thing to remember is that streets are for people. We have cities and we have urban centers for people to live in, for them to work, not just for them to travel through. And so streets play that role for our livability, for our connection to communities. And they're where we have our community events, where we gather with our neighbors, and they need to be designed in a way that can be converted from mobility during the day to gathering places on weekends and nights. So just a reminder that our communities are made by our streets, and how can we make great streets? So Jeff has talked about a lot of these, and Jake talked about the bottom too, but I just want to reiterate the slow streets and the complete streets. So first, to focus on safety, I think 40,000 people died in 2017 in car accidents. We're 4 times more likely to die than some of our counterparts in Europe. And Jeff showed a variation on this image, but I just want to reiterate how our death risk dramatically increases with faster speeds. And part of that's just from the sight distance that we have. And that gets to the point of our street design. So both of these are 20 miles an hour, but you're probably only going to actually drive that on the bottom one, because the top one has the wide streets that Jeff was talking about. There's no friction happening with, there's like 2 cars parked on it, but there's nothing to slow you down from just traveling how fast you want to go. And Jeff didn't mention this point, but I thought it was actually one of his better points, and that sounds mean. It's one of the points that I really liked in the book was, we talk about, so this is a typical 15-mile commute. Take someone, if they're going 45 miles an hour, 20 minutes. And if we really focus on our downtowns, our walkable centers, and slow our streets down, the impact that has on our commuting times is not even a minute. And so I think that's worth the trade-off of going from the 80% chance that you're going to die in a car accident to the 10% chance. That minute, I think, is a good. I think we all can sacrifice 1 minute a day. So now we have safe streets and we have connected streets. We have slow streets, I guess. So the last thing is just making sure that our streets are usable for all people that we're anticipating using them. So bike lanes where we're expecting bicyclists, sidewalks where we expect and want sidewalks. And in our dense urban centers, this can look like this, with our wide sidewalks, our protected cycle tracks, streets for beautification, trees, and that parking to create that additional buffer, and high visibility crosswalks. In our lower density main streets, we can still do this. We can still have parking, bike lanes and wide sidewalks and make that comfortable urban environment. And the reason that we should be doing this is because this was a 2012 Utah Household Travel Survey where 70% of people said they wanted to walk more, nearly 60% said they wanted to bike more, and about half the people said they wanted to take transit more. And one of the main reasons they're not doing that is because we're not providing safe infrastructure. So this is an example in California that looks much like examples throughout the state where we have 5 lanes of traffic, which are in this situation not being utilized to their best potential. And we can come in and make those beautiful places a safer area for people to walk. This example only has sharrows, but still acknowledging that bicycles want to use the area. We've done this in Salt Lake, so this is the streetcar corridor about 10 years ago before the S-Line and Parley's Trail came in. There's no sidewalk, so if you were walking in this corridor, you'd either be in the bike lane or on this thing. I don't know what you call that. We've come in, and although the on-street bicycle facilities weren't really upgraded, we now have not only a transit corridor, but a nice protected cycling and bicycle trail. This also happened in downtown, and sorry that the angle is not very good to get the road, but you can see this was before the cycle track put in. We had those 2 lanes of traffic, really narrow on-street parking, and the city was able to come in, put in that nice cycle track, push the cars out so now the lane is narrower, people are going slower, and we also got bike share to increase bicycling usage. So I know Jeff kind of hit you with his key takeaways, and my key takeaways are, if we want to increase walkability, we have to have better connectivity. We have to have streets that are people-focused and not car-focused. We need to slow our streets, and then we need to provide safe accommodations for our pedestrians and cyclists. And if we can do that, we can return our streets to the people who they belong as our communities. Okay, and then I just want to do a plug for an event tomorrow that's on the same relative topic, which is walkability, livability in our communities. It's from the ICAA and CNU. It's down in Murray. And if you need any information about that, come talk to me. But it's basically a workshop on how to make our communities for people.
Okay, cool.